He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Friedrich Nietzsche. In the dim corridors of history, few voices have echoed as fiercely as Friedrich Nietzsche's, a man who wrestled with the meaning of life until his mind itself became the battlefield. Born in 1844 in Rücken, Prussia, Nietzsche was no ordinary philosopher. He was a poet of suffering, a prophet of meaning, and a psychologist of the human soul before psychology had a name. When he wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how," he did not speak as a detached academic. He spoke as someone who had tasted despair and transformed it into insight. The why Nietzsche refers to is not a simple purpose or profession. It is not one's career, reputation, or social identity. The why is existential, the fundamental reason that anchors a person against the storm of existence. When life strips away comfort, health, love, or certainty, it is only this deep why that keeps one standing. It is the flame that makes endurance meaningful and suffering endurable. Nietzsche believed that to live without such a reason was to drift toward nihilism, the void where everything loses meaning, and existence becomes a cruel joke played by time. To understand Nietzsche's words, one must understand his pain. Throughout his short, turbulent life, he battled chronic illness, isolation, and rejection. He loved deeply, but was never loved in return. His friendship with Wagner, once his greatest inspiration, ended in betrayal. His body failed him long before his mind did. And yet, out of this furnace of suffering, he forged his philosophy of strength and affirmation. He saw in pain not a curse, but a test, not a punishment, but a possibility. To endure was not enough. One had to transcend, to transform pain into power, and despair into creative force. Nietzsche's insight found its most profound echo decades later in the work of Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and survivor of Auschwitz. Frankl often quoted this very line in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, describing how those who survived the camps were often not the physically strongest, but those who had a purpose, a why, to hold on to. A father who wanted to see his daughter again, a scientist who longed to complete his work, a believer who refused to let his faith die. In each case, meaning became a weapon against annihilation. But Nietzsche's statement goes beyond survival. It challenges us to confront the fundamental structure of human life. The how, the pain, the uncertainty, the absurdity is inevitable. We cannot escape the how. What saves us is the why. In a sense, Nietzsche reverses the modern obsession with comfort and happiness. He does not promise that life will get easier. He insists that we must become stronger. The search for meaning, then, is not a luxury. It is a necessity for the human spirit. To bear any how requires transformation. Nietzsche's why cannot be borrowed or inherited. It must be discovered, carved from within. For some, it is found in love. For others, in creation, service, or faith. But whatever form it takes, it must be authentic. Your why, Nietzsche might say, must be your own. The tragedy of modernity, he warned, was that people sought meaning in collective illusions, nationalism, blind religion, or the pursuit of wealth. In doing so, they silenced the inner voice that whispers, "This is what I must do. This is who I must be." What makes Nietzsche's line timeless is its raw honesty. He does not romanticize life. He reveals it. The human condition is not easy, but it is sacred in its struggle. Pain for Nietzsche is not merely an obstacle. It is the doorway through which one must pass to discover one's essence. To suffer consciously, to choose to endure with purpose, is to affirm life itself. It is to say yes even to tragedy. Let us pause and imagine this through the lens of the modern world, a world of speed, distraction, and noise. The 21st century human being is surrounded by comfort, yet haunted by emptiness. Depression rises even as convenience grows. People lose themselves not because life is harder, but because life has become too easy to forget what matters. Nietzsche's message cuts through this fog. He reminds us that the meaning of life is not given. It must be earned through confrontation, struggle, and choice. To bear anyhow does not mean blind endurance. It means integration, to absorb suffering into the architecture of the soul. The Japanese have a concept called kintsugi, the art of mending broken pottery with gold, making the object more beautiful for having been broken. Nietzsche's philosophy is a spiritual kintsugi. It teaches us to mend our wounds with wisdom and will, turning our fractures into radiance. For the people of every continent, from the skyscrapers of New York to the villages of Africa, from the temples of Asia to the cafes of Europe, Nietzsche's insight speaks with the same quiet power. That meaning is the highest form of wealth. A man with a why cannot be defeated. His body may fall, but his spirit remains invincible. The storms of life become teachers rather than tormentors. Every loss becomes an invitation to rediscover what is essential. Ultimately, Nietzsche's message is not about heroism, but about authenticity. To live meaningfully is not to chase greatness. It is to live truthfully. It is to wake each morning and ask, why do I choose to continue? And to find, even in the smallest answer, the strength to endure the day. The why need not, may be grand. It can be the love for a child, the pursuit of art, or the quiet wish to bring kindness into the world. But it must be real. Perhaps that is the hidden beauty of Nietzsche's thought, that even amid despair, there is dignity. Even in suffering, there is light. The man who knows why he lives does not escape pain. He transcends it. He dances with it. He makes it part of his music. That is the secret rhythm of existence, the pulse of meaning beneath the chaos. Nietzsche's own life ended in silence, his mind consumed by madness. Yet his words endured, traveling across centuries to remind us that purpose is not an idea, it is a lifeline. His philosophy was never meant to comfort, but to awaken. And in that awakening lies liberation, the courage to face existence with eyes wide open, to embrace the tragic beauty of being alive, and to whisper to oneself, no matter the how, I have found my why. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates. The night is quiet, and the air holds a stillness that feels almost ancient. Somewhere far in the distance, beyond the stars and the pulse of the world, the echo of a voice lingers, the voice of Socrates. He speaks softly, as if across centuries, the unexamined life is not worth living. It is not a command, it is a whisper, an invitation to pause, to breathe, to look within. Socrates, the philosopher of Athens, never wrote a single word. His thoughts lived through conversation, through the rhythm of questioning and silence. He walked the narrow streets of the city barefoot, wrapped in a simple cloak, asking those he met about justice, beauty, virtue, and truth. He asked not to humiliate, but to awaken, to remind each soul that wisdom begins not in knowing, but in wondering. When he spoke those famous words, he stood before his judges, facing death. The court had accused him of corrupting the youth and questioning the gods. He could have begged for mercy. He could have fled. But instead he said calmly and without bitterness, "The unexamined life is not worth living." To Socrates, life without reflection, without self-inquiry, was like a song never sung, a dream never remembered. To live without examining one's beliefs, fears, and motives was to live on the surface of existence, never touching the deep waters below. He believed that the greatest danger was not death, but unconsciousness, the sleep of the mind. The world, he said, is full of people who are awake in body, but asleep in spirit. They rush, they desire, They achieve, but they do not know themselves, and so they drift, carried by the winds of habit, never truly steering their own lives. Socrates asked his listeners to slow down, to look inward quietly, gently, to ask, "Why do I think what I think? Why do I want what I want?" It is a question that sounds small, but opens a vast sky within. In this moment, as you breathe, as your thoughts begin to settle, imagine walking with him through the ancient agora of Athens. The sun is low, and the marble glows gold. Around you, the hum of voices fades. Socrates walks beside you, patient, smiling. His eyes are kind but piercing, as if they see right through the noise of your life. He does not lecture. He only asks, "What is it," he says softly, "that makes your life your own?" The question floats between you like a candle flame, and suddenly the world slows down. The worries, the noise, the expectations, they blur into silence. You begin to notice the sound of your own thoughts, the weight of your own breath. You realize that in every heartbeat lies a choice, to live blindly or to live consciously. For Socrates, philosophy was not about theories, it was about awakening, about learning to see yourself, not as the world sees you, but as truth reveals. You. The examined life was, for him, the highest form of freedom, because when you know yourself, you can no longer be controlled by fear or ignorance. You become grounded, even in chaos. He taught that wisdom begins in humility. To say, "I know that I do not know," was not defeat. It was liberation. It opened the door to infinite discovery, to quiet wonder. It meant letting go of arrogance and allowing curiosity to lead the way. In today's world, Socrates would be a rare figure. He would not chase fame or argue online. He would sit quietly, listening more than speaking. He would ask you what you truly believe, and wait, not for your quick answer, but for the silence that follows, because in that silence, truth begins to whisper. Perhaps that is why this teaching feels so timeless, because even now we live in noise. The world urges us to look outward, not inward. We are taught to measure life by success, not understanding, by movement, not stillness. And yet, in the quiet hours of night, when no one watches, when the phone is silent, something inside us still stirs. A faint voice says, "There is more." That voice is Socrates. Not the man, but the spirit, the eternal reminder that to live well is to live awake. As you rest now, think of his message not as a demand, but as a lullaby, a gentle rhythm for the soul. The examined life is not about constant questioning, but about mindful being, about noticing, about waking up again and again to the miracle of your own consciousness. It is to pause before reacting, to feel before judging, to breathe before deciding. It is to see the self not as perfect, but as becoming. Each thought, each choice, is a small act of creation. To examine your life is to honor it, to treat existence not as random, but sacred. And so, as the night deepens, imagine that ancient philosopher sitting beside you. His voice is calm, his eyes kind. He asks you one last question before the dream takes you. What is your truth? You do not need to answer now. The answer will come slowly, like dawn, in its own time, in its own quiet way, because that is the beauty of the examined life. It is not about having all the answers, but about learning to live with the questions, peacefully, patiently, fully awake. Sleep now, traveler of thought. Let the mind soften, the breath deepen. You have walked far enough for tonight. The search for meaning continues in your dreams. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Albert Camus, the night breathes slowly. Outside your window, the stars hang. Like small questions in the dark, silent, eternal, unanswerable. And in that quiet, another voice joins the symphony of the wise. It is the voice of Albert Camus, soft yet resolute, whispering, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." At first the words seemed strange. How could a man condemned to an endless task, pushing a boulder up a hill only to see it roll back down, ever be happy? It feels like a cruel joke, a story of futility. But Camus, the philosopher of the absurd, saw something profound, hidden in that endless repetition. To him, Sisyphus was not merely a prisoner of fate. He was a symbol of humanity itself, of all of us, struggling, striving, failing, and beginning. Again. Each day we wake, we roll our own boulders, work, love, loss, hope. And though they often tumble back down, we continue. That, Camus said, is our quiet rebellion. Born in Algeria in 1913, Camus lived between light and shadow, between the warm sea winds of North Africa and the cold despair of a Europe at war. His philosophy grew not in libraries, but in life itself. He believed the human condition was absurd. We search for meaning in a universe that gives none. Yet, instead of despair, Camus offered a gentler truth, that we can still live fully, even without answers. The struggle itself, he wrote, is enough to fill a man's heart. That is the key. The struggle itself. Camus did not promise salvation or reward. He promised awareness, the luminous clarity of knowing that we live, that we choose, that even in absurdity we can find peace. Sisyphus becomes free the moment. He accepts his fate. The gods can chain his body but not his consciousness. The instant he says, "Yes, this is my task," he transforms punishment into participation. That, Camus believed, is where happiness begins. Not in victory, but in acceptance. Imagine him now, Sisyphus, alone on the mountain. His hands rough, his breath steady. The stone slips. He pushes again. There is no audience, no applause. The world around him is silent, and yet, inside him, something shifts. He no longer curses the stone. He becomes one with it. His effort, once meaningless, becomes sacred. Camus invites us to see ourselves in that image, not as victims of life, but as dancers in the rhythm of existence. The absurdity of life, he said, does not lie in its pain, but in our demand for it to make sense. The moment we release that demand, the absurd dissolves into serenity. To live without illusion is not to live without joy. It is to find joy within the real. Camus' words move slowly, like a tide returning to shore. He does not ask you to escape suffering, but to look at it gently, to see that even the most repetitive days, the smallest efforts, hold beauty. If you meet them consciously, as you listen, let his philosophy sink into your breath. Feel the rhythm of your own day, the waking, the striving, the falling, the beginning again. We are all Sisyphus, and yet we are all capable of happiness. The high mountain is life itself, and the boulder, our task, our love, our duty. We climb not to reach the top, but to be alive while climbing. The act itself becomes meaning. Camus rejected despair because he saw that rebellion, not rage, but calm defiance, gives us dignity. "I rebel, therefore I exist," he wrote. Rebellion, in his sense, is not a violent act, but a quiet refusal to surrender to emptiness. It is the courage to keep pushing the stone with open eyes. He taught that happiness is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of awareness. When we stop asking, "Why must I do this?" and start saying, "This is what I do," something softens. A stillness appears. In that stillness, life no longer feels like a burden, but like breathing. Camus reminds us that even when we do not understand, we can still choose to love. To love the sunrise, the laughter of a friend, the rhythm of work, the scent of the rain. These small things, fleeting and fragile, are our rebellion against meaninglessness. So as you drift into rest, imagine Sisyphus once more. The stone gleams in moonlight. His muscles glisten with effort, but his face, calm, serene, holds no hatred. He knows the stone will fall again. He knows the climb will never end. And yet, in that endless return, he finds freedom, because he chooses it, and perhaps that is Camus' secret gift to us, that happiness is not given, but chosen. Not found at the top, but born in each step upward. The absurdity of life cannot be defeated, but it can be embraced. And in that embrace, even the eternal struggle becomes music. Sleep now, gentle listener. Let the rhythm of your breath carry the stone for you. Let your heart climb the hill softly, without rush, without expectation. For tonight, like Sisyphus, you too are free, not because the struggle ends, but because you understand it, and in that understanding, you can imagine yourself happy. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Viktor Frankl. There are nights when the world feels unmovable. You try to push against reality, but it stands firm, silent, indifferent. Illness, loss, betrayal, war, or time itself. Things you cannot bend or fix. And yet, somewhere in that stillness, a quiet voice speaks. It is the voice of Viktor Frankl. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. It is not a command, it is a compassion, a reminder that even when the outer world resists, the inner one can still expand. Viktor Frankl was a man who walked through the heart of human darkness, the Nazi concentration camps, and returned with light. A psychiatrist, a philosopher, and above all, a witness, he saw what remains of the human being when everything else is stripped away. In that desolate place, he discovered something profound, that freedom is not the absence of suffering, but the ability to choose our attitude toward it. Frankl watched people starve, grow weak, and lose everything they loved. He too lost his wife, his parents, his home. And yet, in that endless winter, he saw small miracles. A man sharing his bread, a prisoner whispering a prayer, a woman smiling at the sunset through the barbed wire. Even in misery, there was a spark of meaning, and that spark, he believed, was indestructible. In today's world, Socrates would be a rare figure. He would not chase fame or argue online. He would sit quietly, listening more than speaking. He would ask you what you truly believe and wait, not for your quick answer, but for the silence that follows. Because in that silence, truth begins to whisper. Perhaps that is why this teaching feels so timeless, because even now, we live in noise. The world urges us to look outward, not inward. We are taught to measure life by success, not understanding, by movement, not stillness. And yet, in the quiet hours of night, when no one watches, when the phone is silent, something inside us still stirs. A faint voice says, "There is more." That voice is Socrates, not the man, but the spirit, the eternal reminder that to live well is to live awake. As you rest now, think of his message not as a demand, but as a lullaby, a gentle rhythm for the soul. The examined life is not about constant questioning, but about mindful being, about noticing, about waking up again and again to the miracle of your own consciousness. It is to pause before reacting, to feel before judging, to breathe before deciding. It is to see the self, not as perfect, but as becoming. Each thought, each choice, is a small act of creation. To examine your life is to honor it, to treat existence not as random, but sacred. And so, as the night deepens, imagine that ancient philosopher sitting beside you. His voice is calm, his eyes kind. He asks you one last question before the dream takes you. What is your truth? You do not need to answer now. The answer will come slowly, like dawn, in its own time, in its own quiet way, because that is the beauty of the examined life. It is not about having all the answers, but about learning to live with the questions, peacefully, patiently, fully awake. Sleep now, traveler of thought. Let the mind soften, the breath deepen. You have walked far enough for tonight. The search for meaning continues in your dreams. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Albert Camus, the night breathes slowly. Outside your window the stars hang, like small questions in the dark, silent, eternal, unanswerable. And in that quiet, another voice joins the symphony of the wise. It is the voice of Albert Camus, soft yet resolute, whispering, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." At first the words seem strange. How could a man condemned to an endless task, pushing a boulder up a hill only to see it roll back down, ever be happy? It feels like a cruel joke, a story of futility. But Camus, the philosopher of the absurd, saw something profound hidden in that endless repetition. To him, Sisyphus was not merely a prisoner of fate. He was a symbol of humanity itself, of all of us struggling, striving, failing, and beginning again. Each day we wake, we roll our own boulders, work, love, loss, hope, and though they often tumble back down, we continue. That, Camus said, is our quiet rebellion. Born in Algeria in 1913, Camus lived between light and shadow, between the warm sea winds of North Africa and the cold despair of a Europe at war. His philosophy grew not in libraries, but in life itself. He believed the human condition was absurd. We search for meaning in a universe that gives none. Yet, instead of despair, Camus offered a gentler truth, that we can still live fully, even without answers. The struggle itself, he wrote, is enough to fill a man's heart. That is the key, the struggle itself. Camus did not promise salvation or reward. He promised awareness, the luminous clarity of knowing that we live, that we choose, that even in absurdity we can find peace. Sisyphus becomes free the moment he accepts his fate. The gods can chain his body, but not his consciousness. The instant he says, "Yes, this is my task," he transforms punishment into participation. That, Camus believed, is where happiness begins, not in victory, but in acceptance. Imagine him now, Sisyphus, alone on the mountain, his hands rough, his breath steady. The stone slips. He pushes again. There is no audience, no applause. The world around him is silent, and yet inside him something shifts. He no longer curses the stone. He becomes one with it. His effort, once meaningless, becomes sacred. Camus invites us to see ourselves in that image, not as victims of life, but as dancers in the rhythm of existence. The absurdity of life, he said, does not lie in its pain, but in our demand for it to make sense. The moment we release that demand, the absurd dissolves into serenity. To live without illusion is not to live without joy. It is to find joy within the real. Camus' words move slowly, like a tide returning to shore. He does not ask you to escape suffering, but to look at it gently, to see that even the most repetitive days, the smallest efforts, hold beauty. If you meet them consciously, as you listen, let his philosophy sink into your breath. Feel the rhythm of your own day, the waking, the striving, the falling, the beginning again. We are all Sisyphus, and yet we are all capable of happiness. The mountain is life itself, and the boulder, our task, our love, our duty. We climb not to reach the top, but to be alive while climbing. The act itself becomes meaning. Camus rejected despair because he saw that rebellion, not rage but calm defiance, gives us dignity. "I rebel, therefore I exist," he wrote. Rebellion, in his sense, is not a violent act, but a quiet refusal to surrender to emptiness. It is the courage to keep pushing the stone with open eyes. He taught that happiness is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of awareness. When we stop asking, "Why must I do this?" and start saying, "This is what I do," something softens. A stillness appears. In that stillness, life no longer feels like a burden, but like breathing. Camus reminds us that even when we do not understand, we can still choose to love. To love the sunrise, the laughter of a friend, the rhythm of work, the scent of the rain. These small things, fleeting and fragile, are our rebellion against meaninglessness. So, as you drift into rest, imagine Sisyphus once more. The stone gleams in moonlight. His muscles glisten with effort, but his face, calm, serene, holds no hatred. He knows the stone will fall again. He knows the climb will never end. And yet, in that endless return, he finds freedom. Because he chooses it, and perhaps that is Camus' secret gift to us, that happiness is not given, but chosen. Not found at the top, but born in each step upward. The absurdity of life cannot be defeated, but it can be embraced. And in that embrace, even the eternal struggle becomes music. Sleep now, gentle listener. Let the rhythm of your breath carry the stone for you. Let your heart climb the hill softly, without rush, without expectation. For tonight, like Sisyphus, you too are free, not because the struggle ends, but because you understand it. And in that understanding, you can imagine yourself happy. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Viktor Frankl, there are nights when the world feels unmovable. You try to push against reality, but it stands firm, silent, indifferent. Illness, loss, betrayal, war, or time itself, things you cannot bend or fix. And yet, somewhere in that stillness, a quiet voice speaks. It is the voice of Viktor Frankl. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. It is not a command. It is a compassion, a reminder that even when the outer world resists, the inner one can still expand. Viktor Frankl was a man who walked through the heart of human darkness, the Nazi concentration camps, and returned with light. A psychiatrist, a philosopher, and above all, a witness, he saw what remains of the human being when everything else is stripped away. In that desolate place, he discovered something profound, that freedom is not the absence of suffering, but the ability to choose our attitude toward it. Frankl watched people starve, grow weak, and lose everything they loved. He too lost his wife, his parents, his home. And yet, in that endless winter, he saw small miracles. A man sharing his bread, a prisoner whispering a prayer, a woman smiling at the sunset through the barbed wire. Even in misery, there was a spark of meaning. And that spark, he believed, was indestructible. When you feel the weight of decision pressing on your chest, remember, that pressure is the pulse of freedom. You are not condemned to chains, but condemned to possibility. And that, if you let it, is the most beautiful kind of sentence. So tonight, as your thoughts soften, imagine Sartre looking at you through the smoky haze of the cafe. He does not smile, but his eyes are kind. He nods as if to say, "You are free, terribly free." But in that terror lies the birth of meaning. Rest in that thought. Let the vastness of choice cradle you instead of frighten you. You are not alone in it. Every human heart beats beneath the same sky of uncertainty. We are all choosing endlessly, imperfectly, beautifully. Sleep then, not in escape, but in awareness. For tomorrow the blank page will open again, and once more, gently, bravely, you will write. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Albert Einstein, narrator, calm, low voice. Take a breath, slowly. Let the world fall quiet for a moment. You've been carrying so much, the noise, the weight, the endless pace of living. But tonight, let's listen to a man who saw light in chaos. Albert Einstein once said, "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." At first, it sounds simple, almost too simple. But like all truths, it reveals itself slowly, only when you stop rushing long enough to hear it. Einstein's life was not the story of an untouchable genius, but of a man who failed, who doubted, who questioned everything. Even himself, as a young student, he was told he'd never amount to much. He couldn't memorize. He didn't fit the system. He wandered through life's corridors like a dreamer lost in equations. But where others saw struggle, he saw pattern. Where others saw failure, he saw motion. Where others gave up, he began again. And in that persistence, he discovered something extraordinary. That difficulty is not a wall, but a doorway. Imagine Einstein alone at night, his desk cluttered with papers, the lamp glowing softly. Outside, the world sleeps, but inside, his mind hums like a quiet star. He looks at the universe not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a poem to be understood. He writes slowly, whispers to himself, "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." He had seen it again and again. Every challenge hides an opening if only we have the courage to look closer. Difficulty, he knew, is not the enemy. It is the teacher. It strips away illusion. It humbles the ego. It demands patience. And when you stay, really stay, when you begin to see what the storm was trying to show you all along, maybe you are there now, in that place of confusion, exhaustion, or loss. Maybe something feels too heavy to carry. Maybe the light has gone dim. It's all right. Einstein would tell you, even darkness is full of light you cannot yet see, because opportunity is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides inside the struggle itself. The greatest discoveries, the deepest transformations, begin not when life is easy, but when life tests your soul. Think of a seed beneath the soil, buried, crushed by earth. It might think the world has ended, but that pressure, that darkness, is what helps it grow. We are the same. Difficulty presses us into becoming. It cracks us open so light can find its way in. Einstein's words are not about success. They are about sight, about learning to see the hidden symmetry in pain. He reminds us, every challenge carries within it the chance to become something we could not have imagined before. So when life closes in, don't rush. Don't curse the mountain. Touch the stone. Feel its texture. It's here to teach you. In the middle of difficulty, the opportunity is not always external. Sometimes it is the transformation within you, the patience you learn, the humility you grow, the clarity you gain. Einstein once said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious." And perhaps difficulty is the first door to that mystery. You see, without struggle, we would never learn grace. Without questions, we would never find truth. Without pressure, we would never become strong enough to see the stars through the cracks. So, tonight, as you listen, as your breathing slows, remember, you are not failing. You are forming. Something inside you is taking shape, even in the stillness, even in the dark. And one day, you'll look back and see that the moments you called difficulty were in fact the turning points of your becoming. Einstein taught us that intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination, the courage to see beyond what is. Maybe that's what he meant all along. That inside every difficulty there is not just an opportunity, but an invitation to imagine again, to begin again, to see again. So breathe, stay still. Let the storm pass through you, not against you, because when it clears, you will find that you were never broken, only reshaped. And in that quiet reshaping lies the purest form of opportunity, the one that turns pain into perception and existence into light. Good night. You've done enough for today. Rest and let difficulty become your teacher, for, even here, in the middle of it all, there is a doorway waiting to open. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. There is a quiet strength in the words of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher who wore a crown and yet spoke like a monk. His empire stretched across continents, yet his greatest battles were fought within himself. When he Beauvoir wrote in his private journal what would later be known as Meditations, he was not writing for glory or for history. He was writing to survive his own mind. You have power over your mind, not outside events. It sounds like advice. But it is more than that. It is a way of living, a kind of inner revolution. Marcus understood what most people forget, that control is an illusion. We plan, we hope, we strive. But the world moves according to laws far beyond our grasp. Empires rise and fall. Storms come and go. People love and leave. To anchor your peace in what changes is to live in constant fear of losing it. So Jung turned inward. If he could not rule the outer world, he would rule the inner one. He called it the citadel of the soul. There, no enemy could enter. No storm could shake its walls. In that place, freedom begins. Marcus was not born calm. He was trained by life to become so. As emperor, he faced wars, plagues, betrayal, and endless political noise. Yet in the middle of chaos, he wrote words. Like water, clear, patient, still. His wisdom came not from detachment, but from discipline. He learned to stand in the storm and say, I cannot control the wind, but I can control my sail. He reminded himself again and again that events are neutral. It is the mind that gives them meaning. If you lose wealth, you can still keep virtue. If you lose love, you can still keep kindness. If you lose time, you can still keep purpose. What is outside, you cannot break you unless you allow it to. The world, Marcus said, is made of change. Everything you see is a river, flowing, moving, becoming. You cannot stop the current, but you can learn to float upon it with grace. That is wisdom. That is peace. He taught himself and us that suffering comes not from reality, but from resistance to it. The more we fight what is, the more we drown in it. But when we accept, not with weakness, but with clarity, something changes. The storm remains, but the soul stands firm. This does not mean apathy. Marcus did not preach withdrawal from the world. He worked tirelessly for justice, for reason, for compassion, but he learned that true strength is not in control, but in response. Events may be outside your reach, but your mind, your perception, your judgment, your attitude belongs entirely to you, and that is where power lives. Imagine him now, in his tent at night, somewhere on the frozen frontier of the Roman Empire. The wind howls outside. His soldiers sleep. He sits by candlelight writing to himself, You have power over your mind. He was not trying to be wise. He was trying to remember, because wisdom, like peace, must be renewed every day. The same is true for you. You cannot stop the world from changing, but you can stop yourself from being dragged by it. You can learn to watch thoughts pass like clouds and to let emotions rise and fall without losing your center. When anger comes, ask, Is this within my control? When fear whispers, ask, Can I change this now? If the answer is no, release it. The mind, once trained, becomes a calm sea. Waves still come, but they no longer rule you. Marcus once said, The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. He meant that life is lived from the inside out. If your inner world is peaceful, no outer storm can destroy it. But if your inner world is chaotic, even paradise will feel like prison. This is the lesson of Stoicism, not coldness, but clarity. To feel deeply yet not be ruled by feeling. To care for the world yet not be crushed by it. To love fully, knowing that everything you love is borrowed from time. Such acceptance is not surrender. It is courage, the courage to face life as it is, and to say, Even so, I will remain kind. Even so, I will stay calm. You have power over your mind, not the rain, not the market, not the opinions of others. And when you realize that, the noise of the world begins to fade. What's left is something still, something sacred, the voice of your own reason, your own serenity. Every difficulty becomes a test of mastery, every loss a chance to return to what cannot be lost, every insult an invitation to practice grace, and slowly you discover that freedom was never outside at all. It has always lived inside, waiting for you to remember. So, if tonight your thoughts are restless, if life feels heavy or uncertain, return to Marcus's words. You cannot stop the wind. You cannot stop the tide, but you can learn to breathe. With it, to bend like the willow and not break. And in that calm acceptance, you will find strength, quiet, steady, and eternal. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Ao Tzu, there is a quiet truth that lives at the heart of all wisdom traditions. To grow, you must learn to let go. No one expressed it with more grace than Lao Tzu, the ancient Chinese philosopher, the sage of the Tao, who spoke not of conquest, but of surrender. His words were soft as water and strong as mountains. They carried no argument, no demand, only observation. He did not ask the world to change. He invited the human heart to see more clearly. When I let go of what I am, he said, I become what I might be. To understand this is to understand the paradox of being human. We spend our lives building an image of who we are, our names, our roles, our possessions, our beliefs. We say, I am this, I am that. We cling to the definitions as if they were armor, but the more we hold, the less space remains for what could be. Lao Tzu invites us to release that armor, not to lose ourselves, but to find what has always been hidden beneath. Letting go is not erasure. It is revelation. When he wrote the Tao Te Ching over 2,000 years ago, Lao Tzu described the Tao, the way, as the unseen current that flows through all things. It cannot be grasped, owned, or forced. It can only be followed like the rhythm of the tide, the movement of breath. To let go is to flow with the Tao. That is the essence of transformation. We often think becoming is about addition, gaining, improving, accumulating, but Lao Tzu says it begins with subtraction. You cannot fill a cup that is already full. You cannot become until you are willing to stop clinging to what you've been. To let go of what you are is not to deny your past. It is to allow yourself to evolve beyond it, to stop saying, this is who I am, and start asking, who am I becoming? There is freedom in that question, a freedom that does not come from control, but from surrender. Look at the trees. They let go of their leaves every autumn, not because they are dying, but because they are preparing for life to return. Look at the rivers. They flow by letting go of the shore. Look at the sky. It holds the stars by releasing the day. The natural world is a teacher of letting go. Only humans resist. We hold on to titles, ideas, expectations, even pain, as if identity depended on what we keep. But Lao Tzu reminds us, the self is not a possession, it is a process, a movement, a becoming. When you release what no longer fits, you make room for what can grow. Letting go is not weakness, it is courage, of the highest kind. It is to trust that the space left behind will not remain empty, that life will fill it with something wiser, gentler, more true. This is the paradox of wisdom. The more you release, the more you receive. The softer you become, the stronger you are. The less you grasp, the more you hold. Lao Tzu often used water as a metaphor, yielding, flowing, yet shaping everything it touches. Water does not fight the stone, it embraces it, and through patience transforms it. So, too, the human spirit becomes vast through surrender. To let go of what you are means to stop mistaking the temporary for the eternal. You are not your job. You are not your status. You are not even your thoughts. They are visitors. What remains when everything else fades is the still awareness, the quiet consciousness that simply is, and that is the door to becoming. When we stop clutching the mask of identity, when we stop defending the image of the self, something begins to open. A gentleness enters, a truth arises that was always there, just waiting for space to speak. You do not become new by force. You become new by release. This is not a teaching of ambition, but of alignment. To live in harmony with the Tao is to stop trying to push the river and instead learn to move with it. The modern world struggles with this truth. We are taught to define, to build, to climb, but not to yield. We fill our minds with information, our days with tasks, our hearts with noise. And yet, peace belongs to those who know how to empty themselves. To let go is to return to stillness, where creation begins. Imagine standing by a lake at dusk. The surface is calm, reflecting the sky. The more you move, the more ripples distort the reflection. Only when you are still does the image become clear again. That is what happens in the mind. When you stop struggling to hold your reflection, you begin to see what truly is. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. It is not just poetry, it is instruction. Letting go of pride allows humility. Letting go of fear allows trust. Letting go of control allows peace. Each surrender is an act of creation. Perhaps that is what Lao Tzu wanted us to understand. That the universe does not reward force, but flow. That what we cling to eventually dissolves, but what we trust transforms. And so, when life asks you to release something, an expectation, a plan, an old identity, do not see it as loss. See it as returning to the current, because only when the hand opens can it receive what was meant to arrive. Letting go is not the end of you. It is the beginning of who you truly are. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. The Buddha. There are truths that every human eventually meets, quietly, often unwillingly. Pain is one of them. It all comes without asking permission. It enters through loss, illness, separation, betrayal, aging, time. It does not knock, and it does not apologize. The Buddha did not deny pain. He saw it clearly as the pulse of life itself. But what he discovered changed everything. Pain is inevitable. Suffering, however, is optional. It sounds almost impossible. How can one live in pain without suffering? Yet that is the very essence of awakening. Pain belongs to the body. Suffering belongs to the mind. Pain is what happens. Suffering is what we do with what happens. To suffer is to resist, right? To say, this should not be. To awaken is to see, to say, this too is part of life. In that difference lies liberation. The Buddha saw that pain is woven into existence. Birth brings pain. Growth brings pain. Even love, so radiant and beautiful, brings pain because it reminds us of impermanence. We suffer not because the world hurts us, but because we demand that it shouldn't. We try to control what cannot be controlled. We cling to what is passing. We fight the law of change. And in that struggle, suffering is born. To live wisely, the Buddha said, is not to escape pain, but to understand it. To see it as a teacher, a messenger, a mirror. Pain shows us where we are attached. It reveals what we still fear, what we cannot yet release. When we observe pain without judgment, it softens. It becomes pure sensation, a ripple of experience, moving through the body. It loses its story, its drama, its why me. That is when transformation begins. Suffering ends, not when pain ends, but when resistance ends. When we stop saying no to what is and start saying yes to the moment, not out of passivity, but out of clarity. Acceptance, in the Buddhist sense, is not resignation. It is insight. It is the understanding that life, by its nature, includes both joy and sorrow, that both are necessary, both are transient, both are sacred. Imagine holding a cup of tea. You know it will grow cold. You know you cannot keep it warm forever. And yet, you savor each sip. That is mindfulness, to be fully present with what is, knowing it will pass, and loving it anyway. When the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, He did not erase suffering from the world. He simply understood it, and in understanding, he became free. We too can practice this seeing in small ways in everyday life. When pain comes, physical, emotional, spiritual, breathe. Do not rush to fix, to escape, to numb. Stay. Watch how it moves. Notice how it changes shape, how it arrives, peaks, and fades. It was never permanent. It was never personal. It was just life passing through you. Pain cleanses. It humbles. It breaks the shell of illusion so that compassion can enter. To know pain deeply is to know the heart of others. To see that every being you meet carries their own invisible weight. In this recognition, the walls between self and other begin to fall. Suffering turns into connection. This is the paradox of Buddhism. The more deeply you accept impermanence, the more profoundly you love. Because love, when free from clinging, becomes pure. It wants nothing, it fears nothing, it simply shines. Pain, then, is not the enemy of peace. It is its doorway, the crack through which awareness enters. When we stop fighting pain, we find the stillness behind it. That stillness is not numbness. It is clarity. It is the space in which pain arises and disappears, like a wave rising and falling on the ocean's surface, while the deep water beneath remains undisturbed. This is why the Buddha smiled, not because life was easy, but because he saw. Through its changing forms, he realized that we are not the wave, but the ocean. Pain will come. It must. But suffering, the clinging, the grasping, the mental storm, that is optional, and in that choice lies freedom. Freedom not from life, but within it. So when pain visits you again, and it will, but do not push it away. Do not make it an enemy. Invite it to sit beside you. Offer it a cup of silence. Listen to what it has to say. And when it finally leaves, it will leave behind a gift, a deeper tenderness, a clearer sight, a gentler heart. The Buddha called this compassion, not pity, but the deep understanding born from shared pain. That is the end of suffering. When pain no longer divides, but connects, and in that moment you realize you were never broken, only awakening. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Jalal al-Din Rumi, there are sentences that feel less like language and more like breath, words that do not explain life, but open it. Rumi's is one of them. The wound is the place where the light enters you. It is a sentence born not from intellect, but from heartbreak, from the deep knowledge that beauty and pain are not enemies, but twins born from the same mystery. Rumi lived 8 centuries ago, in a time of spiritual turbulence when love and loss often shared the same face. He was not just a poet, but a mystic, one who listened to silence until it spoke. His teacher, his friend, his spiritual mirror, Shams of Tabriz, was taken from him suddenly. The grief shattered him, and out of that shattering, poetry poured like light through a broken jar. The wound, he realized, was not his ending, but his doorway. That is what he meant. Pain, when accepted, becomes revelation. The wound becomes the place through which awareness expands. We spend much of life trying to avoid pain, covering it, numbing it, outrunning it, but in doing so, we close the door to our own transformation. Because pain is not simply what hurts, it is what shows. It shows where we have loved deeply. It shows what we value. It shows what is real. The ego wants perfection, smoothness, control, safety. But the soul wants depth, and depth comes only through cracking open. The wound is the place where the light enters you. The moment your heart breaks, your vision widens. What once mattered fades. What once frightened you begins to soften. Rumi teaches that light is not found in avoidance, but in intimacy with life as it is, raw, unpredictable, incomplete. He did not worship pain, but he honored its wisdom. For only what breaks can reveal what cannot be broken. When the shell of certainty cracks, truth has a chance to breathe. When the mask falls, You meet the face of your own soul. This is the paradox of healing. The very thing we run from is often the thing that frees us. To be wounded is to be shown where the light is trying to enter. To suffer consciously is to let that light in. Think of the earth after a storm. The rain soaks the soil, and in the places where it fell hardest, the green grows deepest. Wounds in nature are not scars. They are openings, and so it is with the heart. Every sorrow you carry is an invitation, a quiet question from the universe. Will you close or will you open? If you close, the pain hardens into bitterness. If you open, it becomes wisdom. Rumi's insight is not sentimental. It is spiritual realism. He does not promise that pain will vanish. He promises that if you face it fully, it will become your teacher. Pain is a sculptor. It carves away what is false until what remains is something simple, luminous, real. This is why Rumi's poetry still breathes across centuries, because it does not speak to intellect, but to the soul's memory. It reminds us of something ancient, that light does not descend from above, it rises from within. We are not perfected by ease, but by depth. And depth is born from the places where we've been cracked. Your wounds are not signs of weakness, they are records of evolution, proof that you have lived, that you have risked, that you have dared to love in a world that breaks everything. It touches. Do not hide them. Do not rush to heal them too quickly. Sit with them gently. Listen to what they're saying, because every wound holds a lesson only you can hear. Some teach forgiveness. Some teach humility. Some teach you how to pray. The wound is not there to punish you. It is there to shape you, to open the sealed chambers of your being, so that light, understanding, empathy, truth, can enter. When Rumi says, "The wound is the place where the light enters you," he is not talking about physical light. He is talking about awareness, the light of consciousness that burns away illusion, the light that turns pain into compassion and loss into expansion. Perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: healing is not the opposite of hurting. It is the embrace of hurting until it becomes love, and love in Rumi's universe is not comfort, but awakening. The heart breaks not to destroy, but to make room for more sky. The wound is not the end of the story. It is the opening line of your becoming. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls, the most massive characters, are seared with scars. Khalil Gibran, there is a silence that follows great pain, a silence that does not speak, but listens. He called it the categorical imperative, a law that comes not from kings, not from priests, not from heaven, but from within the human will itself. To be moral, for Kant, is to live as if your every action were a seed, and the world that grows from it is the one everyone must inhabit. If you lie, imagine a world where all lie. If you break a promise, imagine a world where promises mean nothing. If you act with cruelty, imagine a world where cruelty is the norm. Would you want to live there? If not, then reason itself whispers, do otherwise. It sounds simple, but it is among the hardest things a human can do. To act rightly when no one is watching, to choose principle over convenience, to listen to conscience over comfort. Kant wrote, not for saints, but for ordinary people who wish to live with integrity in an imperfect world. He believed that dignity does not depend on success, but on intention, that the moral worth of an act is not in what it achieves, but in the purity of why it was done. To act out of duty, not out of fear, not out of greed, but because it is right. That is the mark of a free soul. Freedom, for Kant, was not doing whatever you want. It was governing yourself by reason, refusing to be ruled by impulse or selfishness. He once said, "Two things fill me with awe, the starry sky above me and the moral law within me." That is the heart of his philosophy. The same universe that holds galaxies also holds a compass in the human heart, a compass that, if we are quiet enough, points toward truth. Kant believed that every human being carries this moral law inside, the voice that says should, even when it hurts, even when no one will know. He called it the good will, the one thing in the world that is good without condition. We may lose wealth, health, or power, but a good will remains pure, a light that cannot be extinguished by circumstance. To live by it is not easy. It demands honesty with oneself, discipline, and courage. But in following it, a person becomes something more than clever, they become noble. In Kant's vision, morality is not about obedience to external laws, but alignment with an inner truth so universal that it could guide all humanity. It is the same principle that underlies every timeless teaching, from the Golden Rule to the Buddha's compassion. Different words, same core. Treat others as you would want the world to treat all. And yet, Kant's version has a unique gravity. It reminds us that ethics is not a feeling. It is a responsibility. To think beyond the self, to imagine the world your actions create. This is where his idea becomes beautiful. Each of us, in every moment, is a lawmaker of the moral universe. Every choice writes a line in the invisible constitution of humankind. When you choose honesty over deceit, you strengthen honesty in the world. When you choose kindness, you tilt the balance of history, even slightly, toward light, and though the world may not thank you, you stand in harmony with something vast, the order of conscience, the music of reason. That is why Kant's philosophy still matters. It is not cold logic. It is moral courage, written in the language of thought. He did not promise happiness. He promised worth. He said, "Be worthy of the freedom you possess. Act as if your life were a message to the world. So, when you face a decision and no one is watching, ask yourself, could I will that everyone do the same? Would that world be good? If yes, proceed. If no, refrain." Morality, then, is not a system of rules. It is an act of imagination and empathy combined. It is thinking universally while living personally, and in that balance, humanity becomes luminous, because when reason and compassion walk hand in hand, the moral law within us echoes the harmony of the stars above. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Gustav Jung, there are truths that do not comfort us, they confront us, and perhaps none is more unsettling than this one. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist and mystic of the mind, did not speak of destiny as something written in the stars. He spoke of destiny as something written inside us, in the places we refuse to look. To Jung, the greatest mystery was not God, but the Arja, human soul itself. He believed that much of what we call fate is not cosmic design, but psychological blindness. The unconscious, that deep unseen part of the mind, is not empty. It holds everything we have forgotten, denied, or feared. Our hidden motives, our suppressed desires, our unhealed wounds, our unlived possibilities, and as long as we remain unaware of them, they act through us, silently shaping our choices, our relationships, our reactions. A man who refuses to face his anger may find it returning to him through others again and again, until he learns that what he fights outside is what he hides inside. A woman who denies her worth may constantly meet those who devalue her, not because the universe is cruel, but because the soul is calling her to see what she has not yet accepted. This is the hidden order of life, the unconscious directing the stage, while the conscious self believes it is the playwright. We call it bad luck. We call it karma. We call it destiny. But Jung called it projection. What we do not face in ourselves, we meet in the world. Until we see it, we remain bound to it. It becomes our pattern, our fate. Jung did not say this to frighten us, but to invite us to freedom. Because once we begin to see, we begin to choose. To make the unconscious conscious is to bring light into the hidden rooms of the psyche, to open doors long closed, to sit with our own shadow. The shadow, he said, is the part of us we would rather not be. It is our envy, our rage, our pride, our shame, our fear, all that we have judged as unworthy, and yet, paradoxically, it is also the source of our strength. Every quality we reject in ourselves holds its own gift. Anger, when understood, becomes power. Fear, when faced, becomes wisdom. Sadness, when felt, becomes compassion. That is the alchemy Jung discovered, darkness transformed, not denied. He often said, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell," meaning we cannot rise without depth. We cannot find peace without honesty. We cannot find light without first meeting our night. In the modern world, we are taught to fix symptoms, to chase positivity, to silence pain, to move on. But Jung knew what we repress does not disappear. It only goes underground, and from there, it rules us. The unloved child becomes the controlling parent. The silenced woman becomes the anxious adult. The unacknowledged grief becomes the constant fatigue. And we wonder why life repeats itself, why we end up in the same stories, the same disappointments. Until we turn inward, the cycle continues. That is why Jung's words feel like a quiet thunder. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. He is saying, fate is not always punishment. It is feedback. Life repeats what we refuse to learn. To awaken is to listen, to pause and ask, what is this pattern trying to show me? Because awareness changes everything. The moment you see a pattern, it loses its power. It is in that silence that strength is born. Khalil Gibran, the poet of Lebanon, understood this truth deeply. He wrote not from theory, but from the ashes of his own losses. He knew exile, poverty, heartbreak, and illness. He lost family, homeland, and love. Yet from that grief rose words so luminous that they still travel across centuries. He once wrote, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls." The most massive characters are seared with scars. It is a truth that feels heavy, and yet profoundly freeing, because it tells us that pain is not punishment, but preparation. Suffering, when faced with courage, does not destroy. It forges. Like fire hardens steel, like pressure turns coal into diamond, so too does life in its most merciless moments shape us into something more radiant, more whole. We often imagine strength as a wall, unbreakable, untouched. But Gibran reminds us that true strength is the opposite. It is the heart that has been broken and stayed open. The strongest souls are not the ones who never fell. They are the ones who fell, wept, and stood again, their eyes gentler, their voices slower, their love deeper. Suffering, he suggests, is the sculptor of character. Every pain we survive becomes a line carved into the marble of our being. The scars are not shame. They are scripture. Proof that we have been tempered by life and found our way back to tenderness. Gibran's wisdom does not glorify pain. He never asked us to seek it, but he asked us not to waste it. Pain is sacred when it transforms us. When you suffer, you are brought closer to the roots of your humanity. You begin to see what truly matters. The noise of ambition fades, the vanity of comparison dissolves, and what remains is something quiet, enduring, and true. The soul that has known sorrow no longer fears vulnerability. It no longer demands perfection from the world because it has seen beauty grow even from ruin. This is the strange alchemy of suffering. It burns, yes, but it also refines. Fire does not only destroy, it also purifies. It leaves behind what cannot be consumed, the essence, the core, the spirit. In that way, pain becomes a kind of grace, a severe grace, but grace nonetheless. When we hurt, we are being invited to deepen, to move from surface to soul. Every tear that falls waters something unseen. Every heartbreak cracks a window for light to enter. Every loss reminds us that nothing and no one was ever truly ours to keep, only to love for a while and let go. Perhaps this is what Gibran meant, that pain, embraced without bitterness, becomes the bridge between human and divine. The strongest souls are those who have walked through darkness and learned how to carry the candle anyway. They do not speak loudly. They do not boast. They shine quietly. Their presence itself feels like calm because they have faced despair and chosen compassion instead. They have faced loneliness and chosen faith instead. They have faced death and chosen life again and again. Such strength cannot be taught in comfort. It must be lived through the furnace of existence. And yet, how gentle these souls become, not hard but wise, not bitter, but luminous. They have scars, yes, but the scars no longer ache, they glow. In his most famous work, the prophet Gibran wrote, "The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain." This is the same law. Suffering hollows us out, so that joy has room to live. We do not grow through avoidance, but through acceptance, through surrender to life's full spectrum, its beauty and its brutality intertwined. To live is to be wounded. To awaken is to love through the wound. If you look back on your own story, you will see that every strength you now have was once born from something you thought would destroy you. Every clarity was born from confusion, every compassion from loss, every maturity from failure. The scar on your heart is not a mark of defeat. It is a map. It shows where the fire has passed and where you found light instead of ashes. The world honors power, but life honors endurance. Power shouts, endurance whispers. The loud do not last, the quiet survive. That is what Gibran saw, that suffering is not the opposite of grace, but its secret passage. Out of pain, the human being becomes more human. Out of darkness, the soul learns to glow. So if you are hurting tonight, remember this. You are not being broken, you are being refined. And when you rise, because you will, your very presence will comfort others who still walk in shadow. You will not need to preach. Your calm will be the sermon, because those who have suffered deeply no longer need to convince anyone of anything. They have already met truth, and truth has made them quiet. And in that quietness, there is power, and peace, and light. It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop. Confucius, there is a quiet rhythm to the universe, a pulse that moves not in leaps, but in slow, faithful beats. Confucius understood that rhythm better than most. He did not chase greatness, he cultivated steadiness, and through that steadiness, he found something rarer than brilliance: endurance. It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop. In a world obsessed with speed, his words sound almost rebellious. But he was never speaking to the impatient. He was speaking to the sincere. Confucius lived in a time of chaos, kingdoms at war, corruption widespread, leaders hungry for power but starved of virtue. He wandered from state to state, teaching about integrity, benevolence, harmony. Many ignored him, some mocked him, yet he never stopped. He walked on, slowly, quietly, believing that even one small act of goodness is part of a greater balance. And so his philosophy was not about achievement, but about continuity. He believed that to live well is to move forward, however gently, in alignment with what is right. You do not need to be fast, he said. You only need to be faithful, because the journey of life is not a race, but a cultivation. It is not about arrival, but about becoming. When you move too fast, you lose depth. When you move too slow but never stop, you build roots. And roots are what endure. Confucius taught that virtue, humanity, is not achieved in grand gestures but in small, repeated acts. Patience with a child, honesty in speech, loyalty in friendship, respect for elders. These, he said, are the steps of a moral life. Small steps, perhaps. But together they form the path to greatness. This is why he told his students, it does not matter how slowly you go. Because progress measured by time is shallow, progress measured by truth is eternal. The bamboo does not rush to grow. It bends, it waits, it listens to the wind. But when the storm comes, it is the bamboo that survives, not the oak that tried to stand rigid. In this way, patience becomes power. We live in an age that worships immediacy. We want quick answers, quick healing, quick success. But Confucius reminds us, anything worth becoming will take time, and that time itself is part of the becoming. Wisdom grows slowly. Character deepens slowly. Love matures slowly. But if you remain true, you will see that everything real moves at the pace of sincerity. When the mind races ahead, the heart must remind it to walk, and that walk, steady, deliberate, faithful, is the way of the Tao, the way of moral strength. Confucius did not preach perfection. He spoke of persistence. Even the noble person, he said, fails again and again, but learns, reflects, and continues. Falling is not the opposite of progress. It is part of it. He once said, our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. That is the spirit behind this teaching. The speed does not matter. The direction does. The soul that keeps walking toward virtue, even one step a day, is more powerful than the one that sprints without purpose. For what is the use of running if you forget where you are going? In your own life, you may feel that your progress is too slow, that dreams are delayed, that change never arrives. But remember, the seeds under the soil seem still, and yet they are growing roots. Invisible work is still work. Silent effort is still sacred. Confucius knew that slow growth is honest growth, and honest growth is the only kind that lasts. He believed that every moment of patience is a moment of power restrained, every choice. To continue is a declaration of faith. Faith that your path matters even when unseen, and in that faith your soul becomes steady like the earth itself. So, do not rush the unfolding. You are not late. You are learning rhythm. Every sunrise takes time. Every virtue takes repetition. Every destiny takes endurance. And someday, when you look back, you will see that each slow step was carrying you somewhere deep, somewhere true. Because Confucius was right. Speed is an illusion. Stillness is strength. Persistence. Quiet, uncelebrated. Persistence is the foundation of all greatness. It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you never stop. For to continue, that is to become. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Immanuel Kant, there are ideas that do not comfort us, they challenge us. Kant's is one of them. He did not write to please, he wrote to awaken. And in awakening, he placed before humanity a mirror, one that reflects not what we wish to see, but what we ought to become. Act only according to that maxim, whereby you can, at the same time will, that it should become a universal law. It is a long sentence, but within it lies one of the most powerful moral truths ever spoken. Do only what you believe everyone should do. Kant believed that morality is not about desire, emotion, or outcome. It is about duty, the inner command, of reason that tells us this is right, do it, even if it costs you. Awareness is liberation. Light does not fight darkness, it simply reveals it. And revelation, once seen, cannot be unseen. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole. To integrate all parts of oneself, the light and the shadow, the love and the fear, the saint and the sinner, Not to become perfect, but to become real. To Jung, this was the highest goal of human life, not happiness, but wholeness, because only a whole person can love without control, can act without fear, can face life as it is. He did not promise ease, he promised depth. And depth is what gives life meaning. When you begin to look inward, it will not be comfortable, but it will be true. And truth, however painful, is what sets us free. So if you wish to know your fate, look not at the stars, but at what you refuse to see within. When you bring that to light, your life changes. Not because the universe shifts, but because you do. Then, what you once called fate becomes understanding, and understanding is freedom. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Off. Simone de Beauvoir. There are sentences that change not only thought, but the very way we see ourselves. This is one of them. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Simone de Beauvoir wrote these words in 1949 in a world still learning what equality meant, but her insight went far beyond gender. It spoke to the very essence of being human. That identity is not something we inherit, but something we create. She did not mean that biology is denied. She meant that meaning is made, that life is not a label, but a process of becoming. Beauvoir, a philosopher of freedom, stood beside Jean-Paul Sartre, yet her vision was uniquely her own. She saw that every person, woman or man, is born into a web of expectations, of language, culture, and habit. And within that web, we must find our own voice. To be born is an event. To become is a choice. The world tells us who we are: daughter, son, husband, wife, worker, citizen. But beneath those names, there is a self that whispers, "I am still," unfolding. That whisper, that quiet insistence that we are not finished, is where freedom begins. Freedom, Beauvoir believed, is not given. It is taken through awareness, through struggle, through creation. She wrote that womanhood is not destiny, but construction, that no one is born submissive, inferior, or defined by another. We learn those roles, we perform them, we repeat them until we believe them. But if we can learn them, we can unlearn them. Beauvoir's philosophy is not anger, it is awakening. It calls us to see how deeply the world writes itself upon us, and then to pick up the pen ourselves. Her message applies to everyone who has ever felt confined by gender, by culture, by expectation, by fear. It says, you are not what they told you you are. You are what you choose to become. That is a radical truth, and a difficult one, because to become means to accept responsibility for your becoming. It means you cannot hide behind fate, or family, or society. You must meet your own freedom and the weight that comes with it. For Beauvoir, that was the human condition. Freedom is both gift and burden. We are condemned to be free, Sartre wrote. But Beauvoir added, we are also invited to be. Freedom is not the absence of limitation. It is the courage to define yourself within limitation. A woman born in chains who still imagines herself beyond them. That is freedom. A man born into privilege who chooses empathy over dominance. That too is freedom. Freedom is not loud. It does not always look like rebellion. Sometimes it is quiet, a thought that refuses to die, a refusal to be smaller than your own soul. To become is to live consciously, to see the stories that have been handed to you and decide which ones to keep, which to rewrite, and which to burn. Beauvoir asked us to see that our identities are not prisons. They are projects. We are all unfinished works of art. And that is not a tragedy. That is grace, because becoming is what gives life texture, motion, and meaning. Every experience, joy, failure, love, loss adds a brushstroke to who we are. And the painting is never done. The danger, Beauvoir warned, is in letting others paint for us. To live as one should, without ever asking as who. She said, "To will oneself free is also to will others free." Freedom, then, is not selfish. It is communal. When one person rises above their assigned role, they open a path for others. That is how societies evolve, through individuals brave enough to become. To become is to take ownership of your existence. It is to say, I am not finished, I am not defined, I am becoming. And this becoming has no gender. It is the essence of humanity. We are all in the same condition, born into the world as possibility, shaped by circumstance, and called to transcend it. Simone de Beauvoir's words are not just feminist, they are existential, ethical, and deeply spiritual. They remind us that to be alive is to be in motion, to be forever learning who we are through what we dare to do. So, tonight, if you wonder who you are, remember, you are not the past. You are the process. You are the act of becoming, and the self you are becoming through thought, through struggle, through love, is the truest one of all. The most radical revolutionary will become a conservative the day after the revolution. Or at Hannah Arendt, every revolution begins with fire, but every fire, if not tended, becomes ash. Hannah Arendt understood this. She was not a cynic. She was a witness to the 20th century's brightest ideals and darkest failures. She saw how humanity rises up in the name of freedom, and how easily, once victorious, it begins to fear that same freedom. The most radical revolutionary, she wrote, will become a conservative the day after the revolution. It is a warning, not an insult. It means that the moment we gain what we've long fought for, our greatest enemy becomes our own comfort. Arendt believed that revolutions do not end when power changes hands. They end when thought stops moving. First, revolution is pure movement, an eruption of energy, hope, risk. It demands imagination, courage, a willingness to destroy the old for the sake of the possible. But then comes the morning after. The shouting quiets, the slogans fade. And suddenly, those who once wanted to break everything open now find themselves guarding what they've built. It is a natural shift, and a dangerous one, because to protect something, we often begin to repeat the same rigidity we once fought against. The radical, once in power, becomes cautious. The dreamer becomes the gatekeeper. And what was once alive slowly hardens into structure. Arendt saw this happen in politics, but also in the human heart. For she knew revolutions are not only out there, they happen inside us. Each of us has known it, a moment of awakening, a desire to change, to break old habits, to begin again. And yet, after the first surge of courage, after the first victory, a new kind of fear appears. We start to protect what we just transformed. We start to defend what was meant to stay fluid. That is the moment the revolution ends. Arendt's insight is both political and spiritual. It speaks to nations, but also to individuals. It reminds us that freedom is not a one-time event. It is a practice, a constant willingness to question even our own victories. She had lived through tyranny, exile, and war. She saw how easily the oppressed, once empowered, could become oppressors in turn, not because they were evil, but because they stopped thinking. To Arendt, thinking was the highest act of resistance. Not shouting, not fighting, but thinking, because thought keeps the soul alive. And when thought dies, ideology replaces it. That is how revolutions rot from within, when people stop questioning the new system, because they fear losing it. The day after the revolution is not a date on a calendar. It is a psychological moment, the instant we choose stability over curiosity, obedience over truth, comfort over conscience. Arendt did not condemn that instinct. She simply asked us to stay awake. She said that power, once won, must never silence the imagination that created it, that every system, no matter how just, needs to be renewed by thought, by dialogue, by dissent. True freedom, she believed, is Not the ability to overthrow, but the courage to keep questioning after the overthrow is done. Revolutions are easy to ignite. It is continuity that tests character, because the question is not how to change the world once, but how to remain open to change forever. Arendt's words carry the sadness of wisdom. She had seen people die for freedom, and others kill in its name. She had seen how movements turn into regimes, and how truth, if left unattended, becomes propaganda. Her message is quiet but piercing. Guard your revolutions, not from enemies, but from your own forgetting. Guard the part of you that still wonders, still doubts, still listens, because the moment you say, "I have arrived," you begin to fall asleep. The revolution, she would say, is not a single storm. It is the weather of consciousness. It is the endless movement between knowing and unknowing, between creating and correcting, between holding on and letting go. The fire of change must never be extinguished, but neither should it consume. It must become light, steady, thoughtful, humane. That was Arendt's dream. Not a world without power, but a world where power never silences thought. And so she reminds us, be radical not once, but every day. In the way you stay curious, in the way you question yourself, in the way you keep your mind alive long after the revolution is won. Because freedom dies not with chains, but with certainty.